I used to think school was this mysterious, confusing place where I could never quite fit in. From the moment I first sat down at a desk in the classroom, it felt as though everyone else knew something I didn't. Maybe it was the way some kids raised their hands confidently, answering questions before the teacher even finished asking. Or maybe it was how others formed friendships so naturally, while I often stood alone at recess, watching them run and laugh, wondering what it was like to feel part of something. For as long as I can remember, I struggled with the basic concepts that seemed second nature to everyone else. Math was a puzzle with pieces that wouldn't fit, no matter how hard I tried to understand. Science was a language I couldn't speak, filled with words and theories that felt impossible to grasp. And reading? Well, I read slowly, each word like a step through thick mud. By the time I reached the end of a paragraph, I had already forgotten the beginning. My parents weren't the kind who could help with homework in the usual sense. They worked hard, day and night, in jobs that left them tired. They were the definition of people who gave everything they had. But academics weren't their strong suit. They hadn't gone to college, in fact. They barely finished high school. But despite that, or perhaps because of it, they believed in the importance of education. They told me to keep trying, to put in my best effort, even if the results weren't perfect. They didn't know it at the time, but their simple words would come to mean everything to me. There was one particular evening that stands out to me. Even now, I came home with another test, covered in red marks, each one a reminder of how far I was from where I needed to be. I felt defeated, wondering if maybe I was just the type who couldn't learn. Maybe school wasn't for me. Maybe I was just different. My mother noticed my slump and quietly sat down beside me. She didn't say much, but she didn't need to. Her presence alone was a kind of comfort, a reminder that no matter how lost I felt, I wasn't alone. After a few minutes, she told me she wanted to try something new. She had this old whiteboard she'd picked up from a garage sale. It wasn't fancy, it had a few scratches, and the markers barely worked, but she thought it could help. She set it up in my room, and each evening, she'd sit with me as I went over my notes. Sometimes, she'd draw little pictures to represent ideas, or help me turn difficult concepts into simple words I could understand. We turned studying into a sort of game, where each concept became a little victory, each equation a small battle won. Slowly, the lessons started to make sense. I began to feel the tiniest spark of confidence, a new sensation for me. My dad, though often exhausted from work, would join us occasionally. He'd ask me about my progress, showing interest even though he probably didn't understand half of what I was learning. It wasn't his knowledge that mattered, it was his presence, his belief in me. With each question he asked, I felt a little more seen, a little more valued. As I made progress, albeit slow, I began to feel the urge to do more. My teachers often talked about the upcoming science fair, and though the idea terrified me, something inside me wanted to give it a try. Renewable energy had always fascinated me, and despite my struggles, I felt a growing curiosity about how things worked. With a mixture of excitement and dread, I signed up. The weeks that followed were filled with equal parts frustration and discovery. Building a model of a small solar panel was no easy task. The supplies alone took ages to gather, and every time I thought I'd made progress, a new problem would crop up. But my parents were there, supporting me every step of the way. My dad, despite his lack of technical knowledge, found ways to help. He'd fix broken parts with tools he brought home, showing me how determination could solve problems that seemed impossible. My mom, in her quiet, steady way, would remind me to keep going, encouraging me to see each obstacle as part of the journey. When the day of the science fair finally arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I set up my project, nervously watching as judges walked by, glancing at each project with serious expressions. My heart pounded as they approached my table, and I felt a wave of insecurity, certain that they'd see right through me, that they'd realize I didn't belong there. But to my surprise, they seemed genuinely interested. They asked me questions, and for the first time, I answered with confidence. I didn't win, but they gave me a special mention for my effort and creativity. It wasn't much, but to me, it was everything. That night, my parents celebrated as if I'd won first place. My mom cooked my favorite meal, and my dad even printed out a small certificate to mark the occasion. For the first time, I felt like I was more than just a kid who struggled. I was someone who could achieve, someone worth celebrating. As I entered high school, the academic demands grew tougher. tests, assignments, and the looming pressure of the SATs made it feel like I was swimming upstream in a river that just kept getting faster. I knew I had to find ways to keep up. But the stress was overwhelming. My parents, sensing my frustration, stepped in with their usual quiet support. They helped me set up a study schedule, breaking down my tasks into manageable chunks. My mom would sit with me, keeping me company as I went through flashcards or practiced equations. My dad, though always tired, found a tutor who understood my learning style. Someone patient who took the time to explain things in a way that made sense to me. I studied relentlessly. And though I wasn't expecting top scores, I went into the SAT with a sense of calm I hadn't felt before. When my results came back, I was stunned. They weren't perfect, but they were good enough. Good enough to apply to colleges that had once seemed out of reach. The day my college acceptance letter arrived felt surreal. Like a dream I was finally waking up to. I had applied to a few state colleges, still holding my breath as I filled out each application, unsure if my journey would be enough to impress admissions committees. Part of me thought it wouldn't be. I'd never been a top student, after all. But another part of me held on to the hard work, the long nights, and the steady, quiet support of my parents. Somehow, I felt as if those applications were as much theirs as mine. When the letter finally arrived, I remember the way it felt to hold the envelope, thick and official, in my hands. My heart pounded as I slid it open. And there it was, I had been accepted. My mind went blank for a second. And then a flood of emotions washed over me. Relief, pride, disbelief. I called out to my parents, and they rushed over, anxiously waiting as I handed them the letter. They read it in silence, their eyes widening with every word. And then my mom pulled me into a hug so tight it almost took my breath away. My dad clapped me on the shoulder, his face a mixture of pride and something else. A quiet joy that words couldn't capture. We sat there together, my parents and I, as the reality settled in. I was going to college. That evening, they celebrated in their own simple way. My mom made my favorite dish, chicken curry, simmered to perfection and served with warm rice. My dad spent the evening reminiscing, sharing stories from his youth, each one laced with the hope that I'd do well, that I'd make a difference. They didn't say it, but I knew this was as much their victory as it was mine. They had given so much of themselves to make this possible. The weeks leading up to my college move-in day were a mix of excitement and nerves. I was stepping into a world that felt vast and unknown. But for the first time, I felt like I belonged there. My parents helped me prepare, their excitement matching my own. My mom would sit with me, going over packing lists, carefully folding clothes, and making sure I had everything I needed. She slipped little notes into my bags, reminders of home and words of encouragement. My dad, though quieter, would linger around, watching, making sure every item on my list was checked. He was never one to express his feelings openly, but I could tell he was proud. I'd catch him glancing at me now and then, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was as if he were sending me off to a place he'd only dreamed of. And he wanted me to know that he believed in me. The night before I left, they sat me down and, in their own way, told me how much they believed in me. My mom gave me a hug, whispering that she'd always be there, no matter how far I went. My dad, with a firm handshake and a steady gaze, told me he knew I'd make them proud. It was a simple moment, but it held a world of meaning. Arriving at college was like stepping into a different world. The campus buzzed with energy, a hum of possibility in the air. I felt a thrill at the thought of what lay ahead, but also a pang of loneliness, a strange emptiness as I watched my parents drive away. I was on my own now, in a place where I would have to rely on myself. The first few weeks were tough. The coursework was challenging, and I found myself doubting my abilities all over again. The classes were larger than I was used to, filled with students who seemed more confident, more prepared. I struggled to find my footing, often feeling lost and overwhelmed. But then I would remember my parents and all the times they had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Their faith in me became my anchor, something to hold on to when things got rough. In moments of doubt, I'd take out one of the notes my mom had packed with my belongings. A simple, "You got this," or "Proud of you," scribbled in her neat handwriting would remind me of why I was here, of the journey I had taken to reach this point. It was like having a piece of home with me, a reminder that I wasn't really alone. As the semester progressed, I started finding my rhythm. There were small victories, passing a difficult test, presenting in front of the class, making a new friend. Each success, no matter how minor, felt like a step forward. A confirmation that I belonged. My parents' support had given me a foundation. A place to draw strength from even in their absence. There were days I wanted to quit. To pack my things and head back home. But each time I did, I'd remember my parents' faces on the day I got that acceptance letter. I couldn't let them down. And I couldn't let myself down. They had sacrificed too much. And I was determined to make it count. One evening, as I sat studying in the library, it hit me just how far I had come. I was here, doing something I'd once thought impossible. All because of the quiet, relentless support of my parents. They had been there in every moment of doubt. Every failure. Every success. Their sacrifices, big and small, had paved the way for me to be here. Sitting in a college library. Working toward a future they had once only dreamed of. I realized then that I wasn't just working for myself, I was working for them. For everything they had given up to help me succeed. This realization filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. A determination to honor their support by giving it my all. The years at college went by quickly. Each one filled with its own set of challenges and triumphs. I learned and grew, finding confidence I hadn't known I possessed. Graduation day arrived before I knew it. And as I stood there in my cap and gown, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude. My parents were there. Of course. Their faces beaming as they watched me walk across the stage. In that moment, I saw the journey we had taken together. The sacrifices they had made. The love they had poured into every moment of my life. I knew I couldn't have done it without them. When the ceremony was over, I hugged them both, thanking them in a way I hoped they'd understand. My dad, in his usual quiet way, simply said, "We're proud of you." My mom smiled, tears in her eyes, and hugged me tighter. It was a simple moment, but it held everything. Now, as I look back on my life, I realize how much my parents shaped who I am. Their belief in me, their quiet, steady support, gave me the strength to overcome every obstacle. They taught me that success isn't about perfection, but about resilience. About the courage to keep going even when the road is hard. I carry their lessons with me. In everything I do. They are my foundation. My inspiration. My strength. And as I move forward, I hope to pass on their legacy of belief. Showing others the same kindness, patience, and love that they showed me. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. Because in the end, I learned that true success isn't about what we achieve alone, but about the people who help us get there. And for me, those people will always be my parents.